The crystal glasses clinked like wind chimes as I balanced them on my tray, weaving through the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits. The ballroom of the Rosewood Hotel glittered with chandeliers that cast diamond-like reflections across every surface. It smelled of expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and that particular scent of wealth. A subtle mixture of entitlement and power that seemed to permeate the air. "Champagne, miss," I offered to a woman dripping in emeralds, my voice small and practiced. She didn't even look at me as she plucked a glass from my tray, continuing her conversation as if I were nothing but a floating tray of drinks. I was used to it by now. 3 years of serving the elite of Harbor City had taught me invisibility was part of the uniform. My black polyester dress clung uncomfortably in the humid ballroom, a stark contrast to the flowing silks and satins surrounding me. My feet already ached in the mandatory heels, and we were only 2 hours into the 8-hour charity gala. The Children's Hospital Benefit, they called it, though I doubted half these people even liked children. I'd taken this extra shift because rent was due next week, and the tips from these events sometimes meant the difference between electricity and darkness in my cramped studio apartment. My daughter Lily was spending the night at my mother's. Again. At 4 years old, she was already used to her mommy working nights and weekends. The thought made my chest tighten. "Watch it!" A man in a midnight blue suit snarled as he bumped into me, nearly toppling my tray. Not his fault, of course. I was the one expected to have eyes in the back of my head. "I'm sorry, sir," I murmured automatically, steadying the glasses with practiced precision. That's when I first noticed him, the little boy. He sat alone at a table near the corner, legs dangling from a chair too high for his small frame. While children ran in excited packs across the dance floor, he remained perfectly still, meticulously aligning the silverware in front of him. 1 fork, 1 knife, 1 spoon, over and over in different arrangements. His small face was locked in concentration, dark eyebrows furrowed over deep brown eyes. His suit was impeccable, custom-tailored charcoal gray with a burgundy pocket square that matched his bow tie, but it was his complete solitude that caught my attention. In a room full of people, no one seemed to notice him. I made my way around the perimeter of the ballroom, dropping off empty glasses and collecting new ones. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted back to the boy. A couple approached his table, but instead of acknowledging him, they simply took empty chairs from his table and moved away. The boy didn't look up. "Sophie, table 6 needs fresh napkins, and don't forget you're helping with dessert service in 20. My supervisor, Marcos, hissed as he passed, clipboard clutched to his chest like a shield. I nodded and hurried toward the service area, but something made me pause. Near the boys' table, I noticed a commotion, the kind of subtle disturbance that ripples through crowds when someone important enters a room. That's when I saw him. He didn't so much walk as command the space around him. Tall, taller than most men in the room, with shoulders that strained against his perfectly tailored black suit. His hair was dark, with silver at the temples that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than older. His face could have been carved from stone, all sharp angles and cold symmetry, but it was his eyes that caught the breath in my throat, dark as night and just as bottomless, scanning the room with the calculated precision of a predator. 2 men flanked him, their bulky frames failing to conceal the outline of weapons beneath their jackets. They moved in perfect synchronicity, creating a bubble of space around him that no one dared to penetrate. I knew who he was without ever having seen him before. Everyone in Harbor City knew of Alexander Volkov. His name was whispered in fear, his business's front-page news, his charity donations celebrated even while everyone pretended not to know where the money came from. The Russian who had conquered the city's underworld, with ruthless efficiency, whose name was synonymous with both terror and respect, the Mafia boss, the monster of Harbor City. He moved through the crowd, which parted like the Red Sea before him. People who had been ignoring me all night suddenly seemed just as invisible as I was. Backs straightened. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forced smiles appeared on frozen faces. He acknowledged none of it, his gaze fixed straight ahead. I realized with a start that he was heading toward the little boy. When he reached the table, something remarkable happened. The stone face softened, just barely, but enough that I caught it from across the room. He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder and leaned down to speak to him. The boy didn't look up from his silverware, but nodded slightly. Volkov straightened and said something to one of his men, who immediately pulled out his phone and stepped away. A woman in a crimson dress approached, her smile dazzling as she extended her hand to Volkov. He took it briefly, his expression returning to granite. They exchanged words, hers animated, his minimal. Then she glanced at the boy and said something that made Volkov's entire demeanor change. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The woman's smile faltered, she stammered something else, then retreated with as much dignity as she could muster. I should have moved on. I had tables to attend to, duties to complete, a job I desperately needed to keep. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the boy, who continued arranging his silverware, completely unaware of the power dynamics swirling around him. For the next hour, I watched the pattern repeat itself. Volkov would circulate the room, accepting greetings with cold courtesy, conducting brief conversations that looked more like business than pleasure. Every 10 minutes he would return to check on the boy, who remained alone, focused entirely on his world of perfectly aligned utensils. No one approached the child. No one invited him to join the other children. No one seemed to see him at all. I was refreshing water glasses at a nearby table when I overheard a whispered conversation. "That's Volkov's son, the autistic one. I heard the mother is long gone." Can you blame her? Imagine being tied to that family with a defective child. Shh! For God's sake, do you want to end up in the harbor? The glasses on my tray rattled as anger surged through me. I thought of my Lily. How fiercely I loved her, how I would tear apart anyone who called her defective. Without thinking, I turned to the whisperers, my voice low but sharp. "He can probably hear you, you know." 4 pairs of surprised eyes turned to me, as if shocked that the furniture had suddenly spoken. A woman with a pinched face and diamond earrings the size of grapes raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Excuse me?" I should have backed down. I should have apologized and scurried away. Instead, I heard myself say, "Children aren't deaf just because they're different. Maybe show some humanity." I walked away before they could respond, my heart hammering in my chest. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I needed this job. I couldn't afford to antagonize guests, especially the kind who donated enough money to have the hospital wing named after them. The orchestra shifted to a softer melody, a waltz that floated through the air like a gentle invitation. On the dance floor, fathers were now dancing with their daughters, mothers with their sons. Family dances, a tradition at these charity events. I watched as a small girl in a pink dress tugged her reluctant father onto the floor, his face breaking into a smile as he twirled her around. My chest ached, thinking of Lily, who had no father to dance with. Jason had disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant, leaving nothing but a string of unpaid bills and broken promises. My eyes drifted back to the corner table. The boy still sat alone, but now he was watching the dancers, his silverware momentarily forgotten. Something in his expression, a mixture of longing and confusion, cracked something open inside me. Before I could think better of it, I set down my tray on an empty table and walked directly to him. I was vaguely aware of Volkov standing with a group of serious-looking men across the room, but I focused only on the child. I knelt beside his chair, bringing myself to his eye level. "Hi there," I said softly. "My name is Sophie. Would you like to dance?" The boy didn't look at me directly but shifted his gaze to somewhere near my shoulder. "I'm Mikhail," he said, his voice clear and precise. "I don't know how to dance." "That's okay," I smiled. "I can show you. It's easy, I promise." I held out my hand, palm up, making no move to touch him unless he wanted to. "You can say no if you don't want to." "That's perfectly okay too." For a long moment, he stared at my outstretched hand. Then, with deliberate care, he placed his small palm against mine. "Okay," he said. I helped him down from his chair, acutely aware that we were being watched. Not just by his father, but by everyone who had been studiously ignoring this child all evening. I led him to the edge of the dance floor, where it was less crowded. "We can start here," I said, "where there's more space. Is that all right?" He nodded, looking down at our feet. "First, you stand on my shoes," I explained. "That's how my mom taught me." Carefully, Mikhail stepped onto the tops of my already aching pumps. I took both his hands in mine, creating a safe distance between us. "Now we just sway a little, like this," I demonstrated, moving gently from side to side. To my surprise, he followed perfectly, his body relaxing slightly as we found a rhythm. "You're a natural," I said, and for the first time, he looked up, almost meeting my eyes. The ghost of a smile flickered across his face. We moved slowly at the edge of the dance floor, a waitress in a cheap uniform and a little boy in a perfect suit. I hummed along with the music, and after a few minutes, Mikhail began to hum too, matching my tune with perfect pitch. I was so focused on him that I didn't notice the silence spreading across the ballroom until it was complete. The music played on, but conversations had ceased. I looked up to find every eye in the room on us. Some curious, some disapproving, some softened with unexpected emotion. And directly across the floor stood Alexander Volkov, his dark gaze fixed on us with an intensity that made my skin prickle. His expression was unreadable, his body perfectly still. One of his men leaned in to whisper something, but Volkov silenced him with the slightest movement of his hand. In that moment, as I held the hands of the Mafia boss's son, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. A breach of invisible boundaries I hadn't even known existed. This wasn't just an ignored child. This was the heir of Harbor City's most dangerous man. I just placed myself directly in Alexander Volkov's line of sight, and I had no idea what would happen next. I couldn't look away from Volkov's piercing stare. His eyes held mine across the dance floor, dark and unfathomable as a midnight ocean. My pulse quickened, and I had the irrational urge to scoop up Mikhail and run. Instead, I forced myself to continue our gentle swaying, pretending I didn't feel the weight of his father's attention like physical pressure against my skin. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, I whispered to Mikhail, who was still standing on my shoes, his small hands warm in mine. He repeated the count under his breath, perfectly in rhythm. When I finally gathered the courage to look up again, Volkov was moving toward us. He didn't rush. Men like him never needed to hurry. But each purposeful step closed the distance between us with terrifying inevitability. The crowd melted away from his path without him having to say a word. "Dad's coming," Mikhail said matter-of-factly without turning around. His perfect posture didn't change, but I felt his hands tighten slightly in mine. "Is that okay?" I asked softly. He nodded, still counting under his breath. I braced myself as Volkov reached us, expecting, what? A harsh reprimand? A cold dismissal? Security dragging me away. Instead, he simply stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching us with an intensity that made my mouth go dry. Up close, he was even more intimidating. A scar ran along his jaw, pale against his olive skin, the kind of mark left by something sharp and unforgiving. He smelled of expensive cologne with notes of sandalwood and something darker beneath, like smoke or gunpowder. Power radiated from him in almost tangible waves. "Miss," he said finally, his voice deep and laced with an accent that turned the single syllable into something dangerous. "Sir?" I managed to reply, surprised that my voice remained steady. "May I cut in?" he asked, the formality at odds with the command in his tone. Before I could answer, Mikhail spoke up. "We're counting, Dad. 1, 2, 3. His voice was clear and precise, free of the anxiety that was currently strangling my ability to breathe normally. Something flickered across Volkov's face, a softening so subtle I might have imagined it. "Of course. Please continue." To my astonishment, he stepped back, giving us space. But he didn't leave. Instead, he stood guard at the perimeter of our little dance, his presence creating an invisible barrier that no one dared approach. The orchestra shifted to a new waltz, this one slightly faster. Mikhail adapted immediately, his counting speeding up to match the tempo. I twirled him carefully, earning a small surprise sound that might have been delight. "You're doing wonderfully," I told him. "I like dancing," he replied, as if discovering this fact for himself. "The counting makes sense. It does, doesn't it? Music is just math you can feel." This earned me another almost smile and a thoughtful nod. When the song ended, Mikhail stepped off my shoes and looked up, this time his gaze settling somewhere near my chin, the closest he'd come to eye contact. "Thank you for the dance," he said formally, like a miniature gentleman. I'd like to go back to my table now. Of course, I replied, releasing his hands. It was a pleasure dancing with you, Mikhail. He turned and walked directly to his father, who placed a protective hand on his shoulder. Volkov's eyes never left my face. Miss... He let the question hang in the air. Sophie, I supplied, resisting the urge to add, just Sophie, as if my lack of status needed clarification. Sophie, he repeated. My name transformed in his mouth into something both beautiful and vaguely threatening. You will join us. It wasn't a request. His hand moved slightly, and suddenly one of his men was beside me. Not touching, but close enough that I understood I was being escorted. Panic fluttered in my chest. Sir, I'm working. I can't just... It's been arranged. He cut me off, already turning toward Mikhail's table, his son walking perfectly in step beside him. I looked desperately around for Marcos and found him across the room, pointedly looking everywhere but at me. Message received. Whatever Alexander Volkov wanted, Alexander Volkov got, even if it was a waitress's time during a busy gala. I followed, acutely aware of the bodyguard at my back, and the stairs following our strange procession. My uniform marked me as clearly as a neon sign among the evening gowns, and I fought the urge to tug at the polyester that suddenly felt like sandpaper against my skin. At the table, Volkov pulled out a chair for me, an oddly gentlemanly gesture from a man who I'd heard had once controlled half the drug trade along the eastern seaboard. I perched on the edge, hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. Mikhail immediately returned to arranging his silverware, but now he was humming the waltz under his breath, his small fingers working with methodical precision. You dance well, Volkov said, his dark eyes studying me with unnerving intensity. Thank you, I managed. My mother taught me. And where did you learn to see my son when everyone else chooses blindness? The directness of the question caught me off guard. I glanced at Mikhail, who appeared absorbed in his task, but was tilting his head slightly toward our conversation. I have a daughter, I said softly. She's 4. Children should never be invisible. Something dangerous flashed in Volkov's eyes. Yet in rooms like this, certain children remain unseen. Unless they are perfect accessories for their perfect parents. The bitterness in his voice was so raw it startled me. For a moment, the feared Mafia boss disappeared, replaced by something I recognized all too well. A parent's fierce protectiveness. Mikhail likes the silverware, I observed, changing the subject. The pattern's right? Volkov's gaze sharpened. Yes, he finds comfort in order. My Lily has a collection of purple things, I said, smiling at the memory. Everything must be purple and arranged just so. She can tell if I've moved even one tiny bead. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then Mikhail looked up, his eyes focused somewhere above my shoulder. Purple is opposite of yellow on the color wheel, he stated. It's made of red and blue. Primary colors make secondary colors when mixed. That's exactly right, I said, impressed. You know a lot about colors. I read the encyclopedia, he replied matter-of-factly. I'm on volume P now. Despite the tension coiling in my stomach, I couldn't help but smile. That's amazing. I bet you know all kinds of interesting things. I do, he agreed, without a hint of boasting. Dad, can Sophie come to the library with us? I want to show her my books. I froze, my smile faltering. Volkov's expression remained unreadable, but I felt the weight of his assessment like a physical touch. Perhaps another time, Mikhail. It's getting late, and I'm sure Sophie has other obligations. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by guilt at the slight droop of Mikhail's shoulders. Before I could think better of it, I heard myself say, I'd love to see your books someday, if your dad thinks it's okay. The words hung in the air between us, and I mentally cursed my loose tongue. You don't make casual plans with the child of Harbor City's most notorious criminal. You especially don't put him in a position where he has to refuse his son in public. To my surprise, Volkov's lips curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. We shall see. One of his men approached, bending to whisper in his ear. Volkov's expression hardened instantly, his jaw tightening as he gave a sharp nod. We must leave, he announced, standing with fluid grace. Mikhail, it's time to go. The boy looked up, his face suddenly anxious. But it's only 9:17. You said we would stay until 10 found. I saw Volkov's internal struggle play across his face, the need to depart warring with his son's distress at the disrupted schedule. Something has come up, son, he said, his voice gentler than I would have believed possible. Anton will take you home in the first car. I'll follow shortly. Mikhail's breathing quickened. That's not the plan. That's not what you said. I recognized the signs of approaching distress. The rigid posture, the slightly rocking motion, the increasingly frantic tone. Without thinking, I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out my secret weapon, a small stress ball shaped like a star that I carried for my own anxiety. Mikhail, I said softly, placing it on the table near his hand, not forcing it on him. This helps me when things change unexpectedly. You can squeeze it or roll it between your fingers. Would you like to try? He stared at the star, his breathing still rapid, but his attention captured. After a moment's hesitation, he picked it up, pressing it between his palms. It's squishy, he observed, some of the tension leaving his small frame. Yes. And it always returns to its shape, no matter how much you squeeze it. Kind of magical, isn't it? His fingers worked the star methodically, and gradually his breathing slowed. Volkov watched this exchange with an expression I couldn't decipher. Something between surprise and calculation. You can keep it if you like, I offered. I have others at home. Thank you, Mikhail said formally. He turned to his father, the star clutched in his hand. I'm ready now. Volkov placed his hand on his son's shoulder, but his eyes were fixed on me. You have my gratitude, he said, each word precise and weighted. It should have been a dismissal. I should have nodded politely and returned to my duties. Instead, I found myself asking, will he be all right? Something dangerous flickered in Volkov's eyes, a reminder of exactly who I was addressing. My son is always taken care of, Miss Sophie. His voice carried a warning I felt in my bones. Always. With that, he guided Mikhail away from the table. The boy clutched the stress star in one hand, his other firmly in his father's grasp. As they walked toward the exit, a path cleared before them, no one daring to impede their progress. I exhaled slowly, only then realizing I'd been holding my breath. Whatever strange interlude I'd just experienced was over. Time to return to reality, to water glasses and champagne trays, and the desperate need to keep this job. I stood, smoothing my uniform, and turned, only to find one of Volkov's men blocking my path. He was mountain-shaped, with a neck as thick as my thigh and hands that looked capable of snapping bones without effort. Mr. Volkov would like your contact information, he stated flatly. Fear spiked through me. My... What? Why? The man's expression didn't change. Your phone number. Address. I don't think that's... It wasn't a request. He produced a sleek phone and held it out to me, screen open to a new contact form. My hands trembled as I took the device. Self-preservation warred with terror as I typed in my information. What choice did I have? Refuse the most dangerous man in Harbor City? The bodyguard took the phone back, checking the information before slipping it into his jacket pocket. Without another word, he turned and walked away, following the path his employer had taken. I stood frozen for several heartbeats, my mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. Had I just placed myself, and by extension my daughter, on Alexander Volkov's radar? The thought made me physically ill. Sophie! Marcos materialized beside me, his voice a harsh whisper. What the hell was that? I don't know, I answered honestly. I danced with his son. His son? Marcos looked stunned. That was Volkov's kid? Jesus, Sophie, do you have a death wish? He was just sitting there alone, I said defensively. Nobody was paying any attention to him. That's because people with brains know not to go anywhere near Volkov or his family, he ran a hand through his thinning hair. Look, just get back to work. Dessert service starts in 10 minutes, and for God's sake, stay away from any more Mafia children. I nodded, grateful for the familiar routine to return to. As I headed back to the service area, I caught sight of Mikhail and his father at the entrance of the ballroom. The boy was looking back, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. He lifted his hand, the one holding my star, in a small wave. Without thinking, I waved back. Beside him, Alexander Volkov followed his son's gaze directly to me, even across the room. The intensity of his stare made my skin heat. He inclined his head slightly, an acknowledgement, a promise, or a warning. I couldn't tell. Then they were gone, swallowed by the night and their waiting cars, leaving me with nothing but the phantom sensation of small hands in mine and the lingering scent of danger. The next morning dawned gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly as I dragged myself from bed at 5:30 a.m. Every muscle protested after last night's 8-hour shift, and my thoughts felt sluggish from too little sleep. But Sunday morning breakfast rush at Denny's waited for no one, especially not single mothers with rent due in 5 days. I dressed quietly in the dim light filtering through my bedroom's thin curtains, careful not to wake Lily. She was curled on my bed where I'd placed her after picking her up from Mom's at 2 a.m. Her dark curls spilled across the pillow. One small hand clutched protectively around her favorite purple hippo. The sight of her peaceful face was both my greatest comfort and sharpest pain, knowing everything I did was for her, and it still wasn't enough. "I'll be back before you wake up, little star," I whispered, pressing a feather-like kiss to her forehead. Mom would arrive at 7 to watch her until I finished my shift at 3. The apartment was barely 600 square feet, with a kitchen so small you could touch both walls with outstretched arms. But I'd painted the walls cheerful colors and hung fairy lights around Lily's bed nook, trying to create magic from our meager circumstances. The stack of bills on the counter, red-stamped with final notices, threatened to shatter that illusion. As I waited for the bus in the misty rain, my mind drifted back to last night, to Mikhail's solemn face lighting up as we danced, to his father's penetrating gaze that seemed to strip away all pretense. I shivered, and not just from the damp chill seeping through my thin jacket. What had possessed me to give my real contact information to Volkov's man? Self-preservation? Yes. But also curiosity? A strange pull I couldn't name? Either way, it was done, and there was nothing to do but hope I'd be instantly forgotten. A waitress who'd shown a moment's kindness. Nothing more. The breakfast shift passed in a blur of pancake stacks and coffee refills. By mid-morning, my feet were throbbing, and I'd spilled orange juice down my uniform shirt. But the tips were decent, mostly from regulars who knew me by name and asked about Lily. These simple kindnesses kept me going on days when exhaustion threatened to pull me under. I was clearing a foretop by the window when Carmen, the hostess, appeared at my elbow. "Sophie, there's someone asking for you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And honey, he looks important. Like scary important." My stomach dropped. What does he look like? Tall, built like a boxer, buzz cut, wearing a suit that probably costs more than my car. He's just standing there by the door. Hasn't sat down. Not Volkov himself then, one of his men. I set down my bin of dirty dishes with suddenly trembling hands. "Tell him I'll be right there." I ducked into the bathroom first, splashing cold water on my face and trying to calm my racing heart. What could he possibly want? Had I unknowingly done something wrong? Said the wrong thing to Mikhail? The possibilities spiraled darker in my mind with each passing second. When I emerged, I spotted him immediately, standing near the entrance, his rigid posture and alertly scanning eyes, marking him as security, even without the telltale bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the jagged scar running from temple to jaw. He identified me immediately, his eyes tracking my approach with unsettling precision. "Miss Sophie Williams?" he confirmed, his voice surprisingly soft for someone so physically imposing. I nodded, too nervous to speak. "I'm Anton. I work for Mr. Volkov." He reached into his jacket, and I flinched involuntarily before realizing he was only retrieving an envelope. "For you." I stared at the cream-colored envelope in his extended hand. My name was written on the front in elegant script. "What is this?" I asked, making no move to take it. "Mr. Volkov sends his gratitude for your kindness to Mikhail." His face remained impassive. "Please." Hesitantly, I accepted the envelope. It was heavy, expensive paper that felt rich between my fingers. "There's a car waiting when your shift ends at 3, Anton continued. Mr. Volkov would like to speak with you. Ice flooded my veins. I can't. I have to pick up my daughter. For the first time, his expression softened fractionally. Arrangements have been made with your mother. She'll keep your daughter until 7 this evening. Panic clawed at my throat. You contacted my mother? Mr. Volkov did. Early this morning. My mother hadn't mentioned anything when she arrived to watch Lily, which meant she'd been intimidated into silence. Or worse, bribed. This isn't a request, is it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Anton didn't bother pretending. The car will be waiting at 3. Mr. Volkov doesn't like to be kept waiting. He turned to leave, then paused. Mikhail asked about you this morning. The boy rarely speaks of anyone. With that cryptic statement, he walked out, leaving me clutching the envelope in trembling fingers. I retreated to the employee bathroom before opening it, half expecting to find a threat or a bribe. Instead, I found a handwritten note on thick, creamy paper. Miss Williams, your kindness to my son last night was unexpected and rare. Mikhail speaks of you this morning with unusual animation. I would like to express my gratitude in person. A car will collect you after your shift concludes at Denny's on Harborview Drive. You have my word that no harm will come to you. A. Volkov beneath the note was a second piece of paper, a check made out to Sophie Williams for $5,000. I gasped, nearly dropping the envelope. $5,000. Enough to clear my outstanding bills and still have a cushion left over. Enough to get the transmission in my ancient car fixed, so I wouldn't have to rely on unreliable bus schedules. Enough to buy Lily new clothes for the coming winter. But why? For one dance with a lonely child? I slipped the check back into the envelope with shaking hands. This was dangerous territory. You didn't accept money from men like Alexander Volkov without understanding the cost. And yet, could I afford to return it? To refuse his invitation? The rest of my shift passed in a fog of anxiety. I dropped an entire tray of waters, mixed up 2 orders, and nearly collided with another server, all while my mind raced with scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. At precisely 3 o'clock, I clocked out and changed from my juice-stained uniform into the spare clothes I kept in my locker. Jeans, a faded blue sweater, and worn sneakers. Hardly appropriate attire for meeting a man who probably wore suits to bed. But it was all I had. As promised, a sleek black Mercedes waited at the curb outside Denny's. Anton stood beside it, opening the rear door as I approached. The parking lot suddenly felt exposed, and I was acutely aware of my coworkers watching through the windows. "Where are we going?" I asked, hesitating at the car door. "Mr. Volkov's residence," Anton replied. "It's about 40 minutes from here. I thought of Lily, safely with my mother until 7. And I'll be back in time to pick up my daughter?" "You have my employer's word." His employer's word. The word of a man who'd built an empire on violence and fear. And yet, I found myself believing him, perhaps because I had no choice. I slid into the back seat, sinking into buttery leather softer than anything I'd ever touched. The car smelled of expensive cologne and new leather, and the privacy partition was already raised, separating me from the driver. Anton took the front passenger seat, and we pulled away from the curb. I clutched my purse in my lap, the envelope with its impossible check safely tucked inside. Through the tinted windows, I watched as Harbor City's familiar streets gave way to increasingly affluent neighborhoods, and finally to the exclusive cliffside properties overlooking the bay. The car turned onto a private drive, flanked by tall iron gates that opened silently as we approached. Ancient oaks created a natural canopy overhead, their branches filtering the afternoon sunlight into dappled patterns across the winding driveway. My anxiety mounted with each curve, until finally the trees parted to reveal a sprawling stone mansion set against the dramatic backdrop of the bay. It was beautiful, in a forbidding way. All clean lines and dark stone, with massive windows reflecting the gray waters beyond. Armed men patrolled the grounds, their movements casual yet purposeful. Security cameras tracked our approach with silent vigilance. The car circled a fountain before stopping at the front entrance. Anton opened my door, extending a hand to help me out. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped onto the cobblestone drive, the full impact of what I was doing finally hitting me. I was willingly entering the home of Harbor City's most dangerous man. "This way, please," Anton directed. leading me up wide stone steps to massive double doors that opened before we reached them. The entrance hall was cavernous, with soaring ceilings and a marble floor that echoed our footsteps. Modern art pieces, stark and probably worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime, adorned the walls. Despite the grandeur, the space felt oddly impersonal, more like a museum than a home. Anton guided me through a series of rooms, each more impressive than the last, until we reached what appeared to be a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk dominated one end of the room, while comfortable-looking leather chairs were arranged around a fireplace at the other. "Wait here," Anton instructed. "Mr. Volkov will join you shortly." With that, he left, closing the heavy door behind him with a definitive click. Alone, I drifted to the nearest bookshelf, running my fingers along the spines of books in languages I couldn't identify. Russian, probably, and what might have been German or Dutch. The collection was extensive and eclectic, everything from classical literature to modern physics. "Do you read Russian?" I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. Alexander Volkov stood in the doorway, watching me with those penetrating dark eyes. He'd exchanged his formal suit for charcoal slacks and a crisp white shirt, open at the collar. The more casual attire did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. "No," I managed, pulling my hand back from the books as if burned. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" He waved away my apology. "Books are meant to be touched, Miss Williams. Otherwise they are merely decorations." He moved into the room with that same predatory grace I'd noticed at the gala, every movement controlled and deliberate. Up close, without the distraction of the crowded ballroom, I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He wasn't young, mid-40s perhaps, but he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to power. "Please sit." He gestured to the seating area by the fireplace. I perched on the edge of one of the leather chairs, my back rigid, hands folded tightly in my lap. He took the seat opposite me, regarding me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You're afraid," he observed. "Wouldn't you be?" I countered before I could stop myself. To my surprise, a smile ghosted across his face. "Yes, I suppose I would." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Finally, I reached into my purse and withdrew the envelope. "I can't accept this," I said, placing it on the coffee table between us. "It's too much." He didn't even glance at the envelope. "It's nothing. Not to me." His eyes sharpened with interest. "You're returning it out of pride, then?" "No," I said honestly. "Out of self-preservation. I've lived in Harbor City long enough to know that nothing comes without strings attached. And you believe I would attach strings to gratitude for kindness shown to my son?" The dangerous edge in his voice made me choose my next words carefully. "I believe that in your world, everything has a price. I danced with Mikhail because he's a child who deserved to be seen, not because I wanted anything in return." "A rare perspective," he said, leaning back slightly. "Tell me, Sophie Williams, what do you know about me?" The question felt like a trap. "Only what everyone knows, that you're influential, powerful." A diplomatic answer. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "And yet you approached my son without hesitation, either very brave or very foolish." "I didn't know who he was," I admitted. "Not until later." Would it have mattered? I considered the question seriously. "No. He's a child first. Your son second." Something shifted in his expression, a softening so subtle I might have imagined it. He stood abruptly, moving to pour 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter on a side table. "Do you know why I asked you here?" he said, his back to me. "To thank me for being kind to Mikhail," I replied, the words feeling inadequate even as I spoke them. He returned, offering me one of the glasses. "That's part of it." I accepted the drink automatically, though I had no intention of consuming alcohol in a situation that required all my wits. The glass was heavy in my hand, the crystal catching the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Mikhail has difficulties," Volkov continued, resuming his seat. "He experiences the world differently. Most people see only the challenges, not the gifts. He's autistic, I said quietly. My neighbor's son is on the spectrum. Different, not less. Volkov's gaze sharpened. You understand, then? Not completely, I admitted. Every child is unique, but I recognize when someone is being excluded because they don't fit neatly into expectations. He studied me over the rim of his glass. The world can be cruel to those who are different. I have spent years shielding my son from that cruelty, only to watch him being ignored by the very people who smile to my face and accept my donations. The bitterness in his voice was raw and unexpectedly human. I found myself wondering about the woman who had given birth to Mikhail, Volkov's wife or partner, now conspicuously absent. Where is his mother? I asked before I could stop myself. His expression hardened instantly. That is not a topic for discussion. I'm sorry, I said quickly. That was inappropriate. He set down his glass with deliberate care. Mikhail asked about you this morning. He wanted to know if you would visit again. He rarely expresses interest in people outside our household. My heart twisted at the thought of the solemn little boy asking after me. He's a special child, yes, Volkov agreed, his voice softening fractionally, which is why I'm offering you a position. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. Position as Mikhail's companion, 3 days a week from 4 until 8 in the evening. You would spend time with him, engage in activities he enjoys, perhaps expand his comfort with social situations. Your daughter would be welcome to join you here. I stared at him, speechless. You want to hire me? To be friends with your son? Not friends, Volkov corrected, his tone precise. A companion. Someone who sees him as he is, not as others wish him to be. My mind raced with the implications. Why me? You could hire professionals, therapists who specialize in working with autistic children. He has therapists, speech pathologists, behavioral specialists, a team of experts with impeccable credentials. His fingers tapped once against his knee, the only sign of impatience. What he lacks is someone who approached him naturally, without agenda or fear. I swallowed hard, trying to process what he was suggesting. And my compensation? $5,000 per week plus expenses. The glass nearly slipped from my fingers. Per week? My voice emerged as a strangled whisper. Is that insufficient? He asked, with the casual air of someone discussing pocket change, rather than more money than I made in 3 months. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, which I quickly suppressed. No, it's excessive. Not to me. His dark eyes studied me intently. Your time has value, Sophie Williams, as does your unique ability to connect with my son. $20,000 a month. The numbers swam in my head, conjuring images of a life without constant financial terror. Lily in a better school, a safer apartment, no more juggling multiple jobs and still falling short every month. It was too good to be true, which meant it wasn't true. What's the real reason? I asked, setting my untouched drink on the table. This isn't just about Mikhail. Something dangerous flickered across his face, a reminder of exactly who I was dealing with. You question my motives regarding my own child? I fought the instinct to back down. I question why a man like you would bring a waitress from Denny's into his home, offer her an impossible sum of money, and expect nothing beyond spending time with his son. A man like me, he repeated, the words flat and cold. Heat crawled up my neck. I didn't mean... You did. He stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the bay. His back to me, he continued. You know the rumors, the whispers. Harbor City's monster, the Russian who builds his fortune on blood and fear. I remained silent, uncertain how to respond to the truth we both knew. What you don't know, he continued, his voice dropping lower, is what it means to be a father to a child others would discard. To watch your flesh and blood being treated as invisible, or worse, as defective. He turned back to me, and the raw emotion in his eyes caught me off guard. Last night, for 17 minutes, my son danced. He smiled. He connected with another human being who wasn't paid to tolerate his differences. His jaw tightened. So yes, Sophie Williams, I am offering you an impossible sum because that moment was priceless to me. Shame washed through me, whatever else Alexander Volkov might be, and I had no illusions about the darkness his power was built on. His love for his son was genuine. I'm sorry, I said softly. I shouldn't have implied otherwise. He dismissed my apology with a slight gesture. Your suspicion is natural. In your position, I would feel the same. I twisted my hands in my lap, torn between the opportunity he was offering and the voice of caution screaming in my head. May I think about it? Of course. He moved back to his seat, resuming his composed demeanor. I'll need your answer by Wednesday. 3 days. 3 days to decide whether to entangle my life, and by extension, Lily's, with Alexander Volkov's world. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small object and placed it on the table between us. My heart contracted. It was the stress star I'd given Mikhail, now slightly worn from constant handling. He hasn't let it out of his sight since last night, Volkov explained. He asked me to thank you properly for it. I stared at the small star, remembering how quickly it had calmed Mikhail's distress. He's welcome to keep it. He wanted you to see that he's taking good care of it. For the first time, a genuine smile softened Volkov's stern features. He's very concerned with doing things properly. The unexpected glimpse of normalcy, a father indulging his son's earnest request, caught me off guard. It humanized him in a way that made it harder to maintain my protective distance. Would you like to see him before you leave? Volkov asked. He's in his rooms upstairs. I hesitated, then nodded. Despite my reservations about Volkov's world, I couldn't deny my curiosity about Mikhail and his life here, and something in me wanted to ensure he was truly well cared for, not just another possession of a powerful man. Volkov led me from the library through a series of elegantly appointed rooms. The house was beautiful, but sterile, lacking the warmth of a true family home. No photos adorned the walls, no casual clutter suggested everyday life. As we climbed a sweeping staircase to the second floor, I noticed the increased security presence. Men stationed at strategic points throughout the house, their attention snapping to us as we passed. Volkov acknowledged them with the barest nod, their presence clearly a normal part of his existence. We stopped outside a door painted a deep blue. Unlike the other doors in the hallway, blue is his favorite color, Volkov explained, noticing my observation. It calms him. He knocked in a specific pattern, 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. Come in, please, called Mikhail's precise voice from within. Volkov pushed open the door, revealing what could only be described as a child's paradise. The spacious room was meticulously organized into distinct zones. A reading nook with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a study area with a child-sized desk, a building station with elaborate Lego constructions, and a cozy bed area with star-patterned bedding. Mikhail sat cross-legged on a plush carpet, carefully assembling what appeared to be a complex model of the solar system. He looked up as we entered, his gaze focusing somewhere near my shoulder. "Hello, Sophie," he said, setting down the piece in his hand with careful precision. "You came to our house." "I did," I smiled. "Your dad invited me. You have a beautiful room." He nodded matter-of-factly. "I designed the layout myself. Everything has a place." He stood, moving with the same deliberate grace I'd noticed at the gala. "Would you like to see my books? I have 342. "I'd love to," I replied honestly. Mikhail led me to his bookshelves, pointing out his favorites with solemn pride. His collection was impressive for any child, let alone a 6-year-old, ranging from illustrated encyclopedias to advanced texts on astronomy and mathematics. "This one explains black holes," he said, pulling out a book clearly intended for much older readers. "The math is fascinating." As he showed me his treasures, I observed his interactions with his father. Volkov stood slightly apart, giving his son space, but his eyes never left Mikhail. When the boy occasionally looked to him for confirmation or approval, Volkov responded with immediate, focused attention. Never dismissive, never distracted. "Dad got me this one yesterday," Mikhail continued, showing me a beautifully illustrated book about marine life. Because I want to be a marine biologist. Or maybe an astronaut. I haven't decided yet. You have plenty of time to decide, I assured him. Dad says I can be anything I want, Mikhail stated with absolute certainty, as long as I work hard and follow the rules. The phrase sounded rehearsed, a mantra repeated often enough to be internalized. I glanced at Volkov, wondering what other rules his son was expected to follow. Mikhail, Volkov said gently, Sophie needs to return home to her daughter soon. Is there anything else you'd like to show her first? Disappointment flickered across the boy's face, but he nodded in understanding. Just one more thing. He crossed to his desk and carefully opened a drawer, removing something wrapped in a blue cloth. With deliberate movements, he unwrapped it to reveal a small music box made of polished wood. This was my mother's, he said, his voice softer now. Dad gave it to me to keep safe. He wound the key at the base of the box and opened the lid. A haunting melody filled the room. Something classical that I couldn't identify but found unexpectedly moving. It's Tchaikovsky, Mikhail explained. Swan Lake. Mom danced to it when she was young, I felt, rather than saw Volkov's tension at the mention of Mikhail's mother. But he made no move to interrupt, watching his son with an unreadable expression. It's beautiful, I said as the melody faded. Thank you for sharing it with me. Mikhail carefully rewrapped the music box and returned it to its drawer. Will you come back? He asked, his gaze fixed somewhere over my left shoulder. To see the rest of my books? The direct question caught me unprepared. I looked to Volkov, who merely raised an eyebrow, leaving the response entirely to me. I hope so, I said carefully. Your dad and I are talking about me visiting you sometimes. This seemed to satisfy him. Good. I'd like that. He turned to his father. Can Sophie bring her daughter next time? You said she has a daughter. Her name is Lily, I supplied. She's 4. Mikhail considered this information with serious deliberation. I don't have many books for 4-year-olds. But I could share my building blocks. The wooden ones, not the Legos. Legos have small pieces. The thoughtfulness of his concern touched me deeply. That's very considerate, Mikhail. Lily would love wooden blocks. Volkov placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. It's time for Sophie to go now. What do we say? Thank you for visiting, Mikhail recited, then added with unprompted sincerity. I'm glad you came to our house. I'm glad too, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. Volkov escorted me from the room after Mikhail returned to his solar system model. As we walked back downstairs, I found myself reassessing everything I thought I knew about Alexander Volkov. The tenderness he showed his son couldn't be faked. The patience and understanding he demonstrated with Mikhail's needs spoke of years of dedicated parenting, none of which erased the darker truths about who he was and how he'd acquired his power. At the foot of the stairs, he broke our silence. You see now why I asked you here. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. He's an extraordinary child. Yes, he agreed, and like all extraordinary things, vulnerable to those who fear or envy what they don't understand. There was history in that statement, pain and perhaps violence that I didn't dare probe. Instead, I asked the question that had been forming since I'd first set foot in this beautiful, fortress-like home. Where is his mother? This time, Volkov didn't shut down the inquiry. His jaw tightened, but after a moment he answered, dead, 4 years ago. The stark finality of the word hung between us. I thought of Mikhail, only 2 when he lost his mother, too young to form many lasting memories, yet old enough to feel the absence. I'm sorry, I said softly. That must have been incredibly difficult for both of you. Something flashed in his eyes, surprise perhaps, at my simple acknowledgement of his grief alongside his son's. Life continues, he said, his accent thickening slightly. For his sake, if nothing else. We reached the entrance hall, where Anton waited discreetly by the front doors. Our time was clearly at an end. The offer stands, Volkov said, his business-like tone returning. 3 days a week, 4 to 8. Your daughter is welcome. Anton will provide you with a phone for direct communication, for security reasons. A phone that would undoubtedly be monitored, I realized, Just one of many ways my life would change if I accepted his offer. Wednesday, I confirmed, still uncertain what my answer would be. He extended his hand, the gesture oddly formal after the intimacy of meeting his son and glimpsing his private grief. I placed my hand in his, expecting a brief professional handshake. Instead, he held it a moment longer than necessary, his fingers warm and strong around mine. "Mikhail rarely connects with strangers," he said, his voice low. "Whatever you decide, thank you for seeing my son when others looked away." He released my hand, and I felt the ghost of his touch linger against my skin. "Anton will drive you home." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the depths of his mansion. I stood for a moment, still feeling the impression of his hand on mine, before following Anton out to the waiting car. The drive back to the city passed in silence. I watched the landscape change from exclusive estates to middle-class neighborhoods, and finally to my own rundown apartment complex. Anton pulled up to the curb with precise timing, exactly 6:45 p.m., giving me 15 minutes to reach my mother's apartment on the next block. "Mr. Volkov asked me to return this to you," Anton said as he opened my door. He handed me the envelope I'd left on the coffee table. "He insists." I started to protest, but something in Anton's expression stopped me. "This isn't about the job offer?" "No," he confirmed. "This is for last night. Separate matter." I hesitated, then accepted the envelope. "Thank you for the ride." Anton's stern face softened fractionally. "Mikhail has been through much. You made him smile." Before I could respond, he was back in the car, pulling away from the curb with silent efficiency. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the envelope and trying to make sense of the day's events. The rational part of me screamed that I should run as far as possible from Alexander Volkov and his world. But another part, the part that had seen Mikhail's careful handling of his treasured possessions, and the grief hidden beneath his father's controlled exterior, wasn't so certain. As I walked to my mother's apartment to retrieve Lily, the impossible decision weighed on me. $20,000 a month would change our lives completely, but what other costs would come with binding ourselves to the Volkov family? The envelope felt heavy in my hand, a tangible reminder of the choice before me, and the man behind the offer, whose dark eyes seemed to see straight through to my core. "Mommy, are we really going to the big house again?" Lily bounced in her car seat, her dark curls flying with each movement. Her excitement had been building since I told her we'd be visiting a special friend today. "Yes, little star. Remember what we talked about?" I adjusted the rearview mirror to see her better as I navigated the winding coastal road leading to Volkov's estate. "Be polite and use my inside voice," she recited. "And Mikhail might not want hugs or high fives, and that's okay." "Perfect." I smiled at her through the mirror. It had been 3 weeks since I'd made the decision that changed everything. 3 weeks of twice-weekly visits to the Volkov mansion, where Mikhail gradually opened up under Lily's uninhibited chatter and my patient presence. 3 weeks of the strange double life I now led, waitress by morning, companion to a Mafia boss's son by evening. The first paycheck had arrived exactly as promised. A sum so staggering I'd stared at the bank notification for a full 5 minutes before believing it was real. I'd immediately paid off our outstanding bills, secured a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, and put the rest aside for Lily's future. The second check came with an unexpected bonus: tuition for Lily at Harbor Prep, the city's most exclusive preschool. I'd initially balked at the gesture, seeing it as overstepping, but Volkov had framed it as a practical solution to our scheduling challenges. Having Lily in a school 5 minutes from his estate made it easier for me to bring her along on my visits. "Will Mr. V have cookies today?" Lily asked, pulling me from my thoughts. I suppressed a smile at her nickname for Alexander Volkov, the name she'd given him when she couldn't pronounce his full name. To my ongoing astonishment, he hadn't corrected her. "I'm sure he will." In fact, I knew he would. Despite his fearsome reputation, Volkov never failed to have Lily's favorite chocolate chip cookies freshly made for our visits. The gates to the estate opened as we approached, the security team now familiar with my modest Honda. I parked in the circular driveway, helping Lily unbuckle her seatbelt. She immediately reached for the small purple backpack containing treasures she wanted to show Mikhail. Anton greeted us at the front door with a nod that had grown almost warm over the weeks. "They're in the garden room," I followed the now familiar path through the mansion, Lily skipping ahead. With each visit, the house felt less like a museum and more like what it actually was. A home, albeit an extraordinarily luxurious one. The garden room was a recent discovery, a stunning conservatory filled with exotic plants and comfortable seating, offering views of both the meticulously landscaped gardens and the bay beyond. It had quickly become Mikhail's favorite place for our visits, the natural light and organized plant specimens providing both comfort and stimulation for him. "Sophie! Lily!" Mikhail's voice called out as we entered. He stood from his position at a small table covered with botanical specimens, careful not to disturb his arrangement. Though he didn't approach for physical contact, his entire demeanor brightened. "You're exactly on time. 4:00 and 27 seconds. Volkov rose from where he'd been sitting nearby, closing a leather portfolio. "Ms. Williams." "Lily." His formal greeting was belied by the warmth in his eyes as he looked at my daughter. "Cook has prepared refreshments." "Cookies?" Lily asked hopefully, already eyeing the covered tray on a side table. The corner of Volkov's mouth twitched, the closest he came to smiling in casual conversation. "Perhaps. After activities," I reminded Lily gently. "What are you working on today, Mikhail?" "Plant classifications," he explained, leading us back to his table. "Dad brought specimens from the greenhouse. I'm organizing them by family, genus, and species." While Mikhail solemnly showed Lily his categorization system, I found myself standing beside Volkov, watching our children interact. "She draws him out," he observed quietly. "It's good for him." "It's good for her too," I admitted. "She's learning patience, consideration for others' needs." Something that might have been approval flickered across his features. Over the weeks, I'd become more adept at reading his subtle expressions. The slight tension around his eyes when concerned, the barely perceptible softening of his mouth when pleased. It was like learning a foreign language, decoding the careful restraint that masked his emotions. "There's something we need to discuss," he said, his voice pitched low enough that the children couldn't hear. "Later." Uneasiness flickered through me. Despite the comfortable routine we'd established, I never forgot who Alexander Volkov was, what he did when he wasn't being a devoted father or unexpectedly thoughtful employer. The world he inhabited remained largely invisible during our visits, but occasionally, reality intruded in the form of urgent calls, grim-faced men delivering messages, or discussions that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. I nodded, pushing my concern aside to focus on the children. For the next hour, Mikhail led us through his botanical classification system with meticulous precision, while Lily asked questions that would have tested the patience of most 6-year-olds. But Mikhail answered each one carefully, his knowledge of plants impressive for a child of any age. After cookies and milk, served on fine china that had made me nervous at first, but which Lily now handled with exaggerated care, the children moved to the carpeted area where Mikhail kept a set of wooden building blocks, specifically for Lily's visits. "May I speak with you now?" Volkov asked, gesturing toward the adjoining terrace. I glanced at the children, engaged in collaborative building. "We'll just be on the terrace," I told them. "Call if you need anything." The October air carried a crisp chill as we stepped outside. Below us, armed guards patrolled the perimeter of the property, their dark figures stark against the manicured lawns. The juxtaposition was jarring, the idyllic scene of children playing inside, the heavily armed security outside. Volkov stood at the stone balustrade, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "Mikhail's birthday is in 2 weeks." Not what I'd been expecting. "That's wonderful. Is there something special planned?" "I'm hosting a small gathering here. Family, a few trusted associates." He turned to face me, his expression carefully neutral. "I would like you and Lily to attend." "Oh," I blinked in surprise. Are you sure that's appropriate? Mikhail has requested it specifically." A faint smile touched his lips. He's never asked for guests at his birthday before. Only scientific equipment or books. Pride warmed my chest at the progress we'd made with Mikhail. "Then of course we'll come." "What time?" "The gathering begins at 2. He hesitated, something unusual for a man who always chose his words with precision. "There is another matter," The serious tone in his voice set off warning bells. What is it? There has been a situation. Nothing that concerns you directly, but precautions are necessary. His jaw tightened. Additional security measures have been implemented around the estate. You may notice more personnel during your visits. A situation, I repeated carefully. Is Mikhail in danger? No. His answer was immediate and firm. I would never allow that. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air, that he would eliminate any threat to his son, by whatever means necessary. It was a stark reminder of exactly who I was working for. Should I be concerned? I asked directly. His dark eyes studied me, weighing something in his mind. No. But it would be prudent for you to accept a security detail for the next few weeks, for both you and Lily. The suggestion sent ice through my veins. Security? You mean guards? Following us? Discreetly, he clarified. They would maintain distance. You would hardly notice their presence, except for the fact that they'd be armed men watching my 4-year-old, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Alexander, what's really going on? His expression sharpened at my use of his first name, something I rarely did, maintaining professional boundaries despite the growing familiarity between us. But fear for Lily had pushed formality aside. A business rival has made certain threats, he said finally. Nothing unusual in my world, but I take no chances where Mikhail is concerned, or those connected to him. Those connected to him. The words settled over me like a physical weight. In just 3 weeks, Lily and I had become linked to the Volkov family in ways I hadn't fully considered. What had started as a job, albeit an unusual one, had become something more complex. Mikhail looked forward to our visits with increasing excitement. Lily asked about him constantly. And Alexander. I caught myself before completing that thought. Whatever growing awareness existed between us remained unspoken, a current of tension neither of us acknowledged. I don't want Lily exposed to violence, I said firmly. Or even the suggestion of it. Neither do I. His voice softened unexpectedly. That is precisely why I'm offering protection. The security would be invisible to her. Just another car on the street, another parent at the school gate. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite my sweater. How dangerous is this rival? He is a desperate man making desperate moves, Alexander replied, his accent thickening slightly. A tell I'd noticed emerged when his emotions ran high. But he will be dealt with shortly. The clinical way he discussed what would undoubtedly be a violent resolution should have horrified me. Instead, I found myself numb to the implication, focused only on Lily's safety. 1 week, I decided. We'll accept the security for 1 week, and if this situation isn't resolved by then, Lily and I will need to take a break from these visits until it is. I expected argument or cold dismissal. Instead, he nodded once, accepting my terms. Reasonable. We stood in silence for a moment, the gulf between our worlds never more apparent than in this conversation about security details and business rivals. I never intended to bring this aspect of my life into yours, he said finally, surprising me with what sounded like genuine regret. When I offered you this position, I believed I could keep these worlds separate. I knew who you were, I reminded him quietly. I made my choice with open eyes. He studied me with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see far more than I intended to reveal. Did you? Or did necessity make the choice for you? The question struck uncomfortably close to truth. Had I accepted his offer because of Mikhail's need for connection or because of the financial security it offered Lily? Both were true, but increasingly, neither felt like the complete answer. Before I could respond, Lily's voice called from inside. Mommy! Mikhail showed me how to make a perfect symmetrical tower. Coming, sweetheart, I called back, grateful for the interruption. As we turned to go inside, Alexander's hand caught mine briefly, a touch so light it could have been accidental, except for the deliberate pressure of his fingers against my palm. Thank you, he said simply. For understanding. The warmth of his touch lingered as we rejoined the children, who proudly displayed their architectural creation. Mikhail launched into a detailed explanation of structural principles, his earlier reserve completely gone as he shared his knowledge with infectious enthusiasm. Watching him, I realized how much he'd changed in just 3 weeks, still preferring order and precision, still most comfortable with facts and systems. but increasingly willing to engage, to share, to connect. It wasn't just my influence, I knew. It was Lily's unquestioning acceptance, her natural ability to meet him exactly where he was. As the evening continued with a lesson in constellations that Mikhail had prepared especially for Lily, I caught Alexander watching me with an expression I couldn't quite define. When our eyes met, he didn't look away, holding my gaze with an intensity that sent warmth spreading through my chest. In that moment, I acknowledged the truth I'd been avoiding. This arrangement had ceased to be simply a job. Somewhere between Mikhail's careful explanations and Lily's delighted discoveries, between Alexander's subtle acts of thoughtfulness and the growing ease between us, something had shifted. Dangerous or not, complicated or not, I cared for this unusual family. Daddy said I could be a scientist when I grow up, Mikhail was telling Lily, using the Russian diminutive for father that had begun to replace the more formal dad in recent days. I thought you wanted to be an astronaut, she replied, carefully placing a star sticker on the constellation map he'd created. I can be both, he said with absolute certainty. Yes, you can, Alexander confirmed, his voice warm with pride and something else. Hope, perhaps. As Mikhail and Lily returned to their stars, he looked at me again. And this time the unspoken connection between us felt impossible to deny. Whatever dangers circled the Volkov family, whatever complications lay ahead, I realized I was no longer standing on the outside looking in. Somehow, against all reason, against all caution, I had become part of their orbit, and they, part of mine.